Nicholas Carter had everything: a thriving career, a family, a future he built from the ground up. But one phone call changed everything. His wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was plotting to take everything from him. His business, his money, his life. But what they didn't know was that Nicholas was always 3 steps ahead. And now, as they scramble to cover their tracks, he's already set the perfect trap. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late. The pen moved across the blueprint with precise, practiced strokes, shaping the design of what would be the most ambitious project of his career. Nicholas Carter barely registered the time as the hands of the office clock inched past 9 p.m. He was in his element, focused, immersed in the careful balance of lines and measurements, determined to perfect every last detail. The shrill ring of his phone shattered the quiet. The sudden noise made his hand slip, dragging an unintended line across the pristine page. He exhaled sharply, irritation flaring, as he grabbed the phone, ready to dismiss whoever had the audacity to interrupt him at this hour. Then he saw the name on the screen. Jason. His son never called this late. A cold weight settled in his chest as he answered. Jason's voice was tight, unsteady. Dad. I saw Mom. At the Westgate Hotel. Nicholas frowned, confusion momentarily overriding his concern. Okay, and? The hesitation on the other end made his grip tighten around the phone. She wasn't alone. A pause. She was with Ryan. Ryan Montgomery. His business partner of 15 years. The man he had trusted implicitly. The words landed like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he could only stare at the blueprint in front of him, the single misplaced line now splitting the design like a fracture through glass. His voice was eerily calm when he finally spoke. Are you sure? A soft shuffle, the sound of movement. Then the chime of a message notification. Nicholas lowered the phone, his hands slightly unsteady as he opened the attachment. A grainy video loaded on the screen. A hotel balcony. His wife, Olivia, leaning into Ryan's embrace. His arm around her waist, her head tilted back in laughter. The image alone was enough to make Nicholas's stomach churn. Then the audio kicked in. Just push him out. Take full control of the firm. He'll never see it coming. Nicholas's breath left him in a sharp exhale. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a calculated betrayal. His marriage, his career, his entire foundation, all of it had been a lie. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, then exhaled. The rage simmered beneath his skin, but rage alone wouldn't serve him. Not yet. Bringing the phone back to his ear, he forced his voice to remain steady. Jason, listen to me carefully. Go home. Don't say anything. Don't let your mother know what you saw. I'll take care of this. Dad, Now, Jason. Go home. Act normal. A long pause. Then, a quiet, reluctant, okay. Nicholas ended the call and set his phone down with deliberate precision. His mind was already moving ahead, sifting through possibilities, constructing a strategy. He had spent years anticipating every risk in business, every possible failure in design. This was no different. Within seconds, he reached for his office phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. The line clicked after the first ring. Jack, it's Nicholas Carter. I need you to start divorce proceedings immediately. He paused, glancing at the still-playing video on his phone. And I need all joint accounts frozen tonight. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then understood. I'll get started now. Nicholas ended the call and slowly rose from his chair, gathering his things. He took one last look at the blueprint, the dark streak marring its perfection. It was fitting in a way. A structure could look strong, solid, unshakable, but a single flaw in the foundation could bring it all crashing down. Just like his life. Without another glance, he turned off the lights and walked out of the office, leaving behind nothing but the remnants of what once was. The road stretched ahead, illuminated only by the distant glow of streetlights and the occasional flicker of neon signs. Nicholas Carter gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, his mind a storm of calculations and decisions. The city skyline faded in his rearview mirror, replaced by the vast emptiness of the highway. Beside him, Jason sat in silence, staring out the window. His face was partially hidden in the shadows, but Nicholas could still see the tension in his posture, the way his hands clenched into fists in his lap. They had left without a trace. No goodbye notes. No explanations. Just a swift, quiet exit in the dead of night. Nicholas had planned it meticulously, just as he had with every major project in his career. By the time Olivia realized what had happened, their accounts would be frozen, legal proceedings underway, and every loose end tied so tightly that she and Ryan would have nowhere to maneuver. But preparation didn't erase the weight pressing against his chest, the gnawing ache of loss beneath the layer of cold, calculated control. Jason finally broke the silence. "Where are we going?" Nicholas kept his eyes on the road. "Somewhere safe. A place where they can't reach us." His son exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "So we're just disappearing?" "It's not running away," Nicholas corrected, his voice firm but not unkind. "It's a strategic retreat. We need time to regroup, to think." Jason didn't respond. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Nicholas knew his son was struggling to process it all. The betrayal. The sudden uprooting of their lives. The reality of leaving everything behind, friends, school, the city they had called home for years. Nicholas had always been a man of structure, of control. He had built his career by anticipating problems before they arose, by ensuring no detail was left unchecked. But this, watching his son grapple with something he had no power to fix, felt like the one problem he couldn't solve with logic alone. He tightened his grip on the wheel, pushing those thoughts aside. There was no time for doubt. They reached the outskirts of town just before midnight. A nondescript motel sat at the edge of an empty parking lot, its neon vacancy sign buzzing weakly in the dark. It wasn't luxury, but it was temporary. Nicholas pulled into a space near the back, killed the engine, and turned to Jason. "We'll stay here for a couple of nights. Then we move again." Jason nodded absently, but his eyes remained fixed on something far away, something Nicholas couldn't see. Inside, the room was as bland and impersonal as expected, stiff sheets, a humming air conditioner, walls painted in muted beige. Nicholas set down their bags, then pulled out his laptop, immediately falling into the familiar rhythm of planning. He checked the financial accounts. Frozen. Legal filings. In progress. A secure identity change for both of them. Pending. Everything was moving according to plan. And yet, he felt the weight of his son's silence behind him. Jason sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone, his face unreadable. Nicholas knew what he was doing, checking messages from friends he would never respond to, looking at the life he had just been ripped away from. Nicholas sighed, closing the laptop. "I know this is hard." Jason didn't look up. "You think?" A beat of silence. Nicholas ran a hand down his face. He was exhausted, but this conversation couldn't wait. "I did what I had to do," he said, keeping his tone steady. "Your mother and Ryan, what they did wasn't just about me. They were planning to take everything. The firm. Our future. If I hadn't acted fast, we would have lost it all." Jason finally looked at him, his expression guarded. "And now we've lost everything anyway." The words hit deeper than Nicholas cared to admit. He inhaled sharply, choosing his next words carefully. "Not everything. We still have a chance to rebuild. To start fresh. I just need you to trust me." Jason held his gaze for a long moment before exhaling, shoulders sagging. He nodded barely, but it was enough. Nicholas knew trust wasn't built in a single night. But for now, it was a start. As he lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, he thought of Olivia. Of Ryan. Of what they must be feeling at this exact moment, the panic, the uncertainty, the realization that their plan had just shattered around them. He allowed himself a small, grim smile. Let them squirm. This was only the beginning. Nicholas Carter sat in the dimly lit motel room, the glow of his laptop screen casting shadows across his face. His fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, eyes scanning lines of financial reports, legal documents, and company records. Every click, every stroke of the keys brought him closer to what he needed: leverage. It had been 3 days since he and Jason had left their old life behind. 3 days since he had severed ties with Olivia and Ryan. The news of their departure had undoubtedly spread by now, setting off waves of confusion and panic. Olivia would be scrambling to regain control of the situation, Ryan scrambling to salvage his reputation. Good. Let them panic. Let them wonder what comes next. Nicholas had spent his career building designs, structures, businesses. Now, for the first time, he was in the business of destruction. He had anticipated Olivia and Ryan's moves before they even had a chance to make them. Their accounts were locked down. The firm was frozen in a legal limbo. And now, he was digging deeper, searching for every crack in their foundation. Because if there was one thing he knew about people like them, it was that greed always left a trail. Behind him, Jason shifted on the bed, scrolling through his phone with a blank expression. Nicholas knew he was struggling. The sudden change, the secrecy, the lack of normalcy, it was a lot for a 16-year-old to process. Jason had barely spoken since that first night. And Nicholas couldn't blame him. He pulled up a secured server and scrolled through encrypted files. There it was, the first piece of evidence he needed. Falsified invoices. Over the past 2 years, Ryan had been siphoning money through shell companies, redirecting firm funds into his own pockets. Olivia, of course, had signed off on every one of them. Nicholas smirked. They weren't just unfaithful. They were criminals. He closed the laptop with a satisfying click. They had wanted him out of the company. Now they were about to lose it altogether. Meanwhile, across the city, Olivia Carter was drowning. The house felt emptier than it ever had. She paced the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, heart pounding as each call went to voicemail. Nicholas had vanished. And worse, he had taken Jason with him. Ryan sat at the dining table, his usually confident posture slouched, eyes scanning a laptop screen. Still nothing, he muttered, clicking through a series of bank statements. Accounts are frozen. The legal team says he filed for divorce and put a financial hold on everything under his name. Olivia's hands trembled as she ended another unsuccessful call. This doesn't make sense. He wouldn't just disappear. Ryan exhaled sharply. Maybe we underestimated him. Olivia shot him a glare. You think? 3 days ago, she had been planning the next phase of their takeover, preparing to push Nicholas out of his own company, out of their lives. Now, she was the one being erased. And she hated it. Ryan rubbed his temple. We need to find him before this gets worse. A notification flashed on his screen. He clicked it open, and froze. Olivia leaned over his shoulder. What is it? The color drained from Ryan's face. An internal audit request. He turned to her, eyes wide with something close to fear. Nicholas is digging. Olivia felt her stomach drop. He wasn't just leaving. He was coming for them. Back at the motel, Nicholas was already 5 steps ahead. A message alert popped up on his encrypted email. A reply from a contact he had reached out to, a forensic accountant who specialized in corporate fraud. Nicholas opened the email. Jackpot. Attached was a full breakdown of Ryan and Olivia's mismanaged funds. Nicholas leaned back, allowing himself a slow exhale. It was all there. The falsified transactions. The offshore transfers. The fraudulent contracts Ryan had approved in secret. And Olivia, signing off on all of them, leaving a paper trail so obvious it was almost laughable. Nicholas had built a company on solid ground. They had turned it into a house of cards. And now, he was going to bring it crashing down. Jason finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. You're going to destroy them, aren't you? Nicholas turned to face his son. He considered lying, softening the truth. But Jason deserved better than that. Yes. Jason nodded slowly, as if weighing the answer. Good. Nicholas felt something shift in that moment. Jason had been hesitant, withdrawn, caught in the middle of something far bigger than he should have been. But now, for the first time since this all began, his son looked like he understood. Nicholas placed a reassuring hand on Jason's shoulder. We're not just taking them down, he said. We're taking back what's ours. As he spoke, he sent one final email, this time to the authorities. The trap was set. Now, all that was left was to watch them fall. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp pavement and the distant hum of traffic. Nicholas Carter sat in a quiet office, a temporary space where he had orchestrated the final act of his plan. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, but this was where everything would be decided. Across from him, Jason sat still, his hands clasped together as he stared at the table. There was tension in his shoulders, the weight of everything pressing down on him, but he had come this far without breaking. They didn't have to wait long. At exactly 10 a.m., the door opened. Olivia and Ryan entered, their faces drawn, their confidence stripped away. Olivia's hair was slightly unkempt, her usual effortless elegance now forced. Ryan's suit, once tailored to perfection, hung a little looser, his movements stiff with unease. They had felt the pressure, the slow tightening of the noose, and now they were here, not because they wanted to be, but because they had no other choice. Nicholas stood, watching them for a moment before turning to the stack of papers on the table. There was no need for drawn-out arguments or accusations. The truth had already settled between them, thick and undeniable. Olivia's gaze flickered to Jason, her lips parting slightly, as if she wanted to say something. He didn't meet her eyes. Nicholas moved with purpose, pushing the documents toward them. Every detail had been laid out: fraud, financial mismanagement, every illegal transfer. They had no room to maneuver, no loopholes to exploit. Their downfall had been methodical, built on the very arrogance that had made them believe they could take everything from him. Ryan scanned the documents, his fingers twitching slightly at the bottom of the page. His jaw clenched, his body rigid, as if some part of him still wanted to fight. But there was nothing left to fight for. Olivia's hand shook as she reached for the pen. Her breath hitched, but she signed. One stroke, then another. It was done. Ryan lingered for a moment longer before he followed suit. His signature was rough, the ink pressing too hard against the paper. Nicholas gathered the documents, slipping them neatly into a folder. The sound of the paper sliding together was the only noise in the room. Olivia swallowed hard. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. It held none of its former certainty, only quiet disbelief. Nicholas didn't answer. He didn't need to. Ryan exhaled sharply, pushing back from the table. He didn't look at anyone as he strode toward the door, his movements sharp and controlled. Olivia hesitated for a fraction of a second before following, her steps slower, more reluctant. The door closed behind them, and silence settled once more. Jason released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His fingers uncurled, pressing flat against the table. His father didn't speak at first, only reached over and rested a hand on his shoulder. A firm, steady presence. A reminder that this was not just an ending, but the start of something new. The hardest part was over. Now they could rebuild. The city stretched out beyond the office window, bathed in the soft glow of morning light. Nicholas Carter stood motionless, staring at the skyline, his reflection barely visible in the glass. The past months had been a slow, deliberate descent into chaos, a battle fought in silence, in legal documents, in sleepless nights spent unraveling betrayal. And now it was done. Behind him, Jason sat at the table, flipping through his phone, though he wasn't really reading anything. The tension that had followed them since the night they left was still there, lingering beneath the surface. But it was lighter now. The confessions had been signed. Olivia and Ryan were finished, their reputations ruined, their future in shambles. The authorities would handle the rest, investigations, financial audits, court proceedings. Nicholas didn't need to lift another finger. His part was over. And yet, as he stood there, a strange emptiness settled in. He had spent so much time planning, calculating, making sure every detail was accounted for. Every move had been about winning, about taking back what was his. But standing here now, with victory in hand, he felt something unexpected: exhaustion. Jason's voice broke the silence. So, what happens now? Nicholas turned, meeting his son's gaze. For months, Jason had followed him through this storm, caught in the middle of a war he never asked to be part of. He had lost his home, his friends, the life he knew. And despite everything, he had stayed. We start over, Nicholas said simply. Jason nodded slowly, as if letting the words settle in. Where? Nicholas hadn't thought that far ahead. The idea of returning to the city, to the remnants of what once was, didn't feel right. He had won the battle, but he no longer wanted to stand in the ruins of his old life. Somewhere new, he said. Somewhere we're not looking over our shoulders. Jason seemed to consider this. Then, with a small shrug, he said, Sounds good. The simplicity of his answer made something loosen in Nicholas's chest. For the first time in months, there was no anger, no bitterness. Just possibility. He turned back to the window, exhaling slowly. The skyline looked different now. It wasn't a reminder of what he had lost. It was a blank page. A foundation waiting to be built. Nicholas had spent his life designing buildings, crafting structures meant to last a lifetime. Now, for the first time, he was building something else. A new life. And this time, he would get it right.